Okay, I will now call to order the Planning Commission meeting of October 27th, 2021. Could you please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance? And ignore that ringing phone. Okay, I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And if you would please remain standing for the reading of the statement of values. Commissioner Harrow?
Yes, statement of values. As we gather, we humbly seek blessings upon this meeting. May we act with strength, courage, and will to perform our obligations and duties to our people with justice to all. Let us seek wisdom so that we may act in the best interest of our people, our neighbors, and our country. All this we ask so we may serve our community with fairness and respect, putting their needs before all.
Thank you, Commissioner Harrow. And then Elizabeth, a momentary note, I know that we do have one commissioner, Commissioner Ikezi, who will be joining us, but a little bit later. So if Elizabeth, if you could please call the roll.
Chair Biagini,
Here.
Commissioner Chair Kuru,
Here.
Commissioner Hero, you
You're
may
on
be
mute.
muted.
Here.
Commissioner Wang,
Here.
Commissioner Salim,
Here.
Commissioner Bhatnagar.
Here.
Thank you.
Okay, we don't need, well, I don't know. Let me ask. Do we need a motion to excuse her until she comes?
No, she will just be noted at what time she arrives in the minutes,
Okay.
but she will be attending.
Okay, then we'll move to the declaration of commission procedures. Secretary Harrow? Are you on mute?
No, he is not muted.
Declaration of Commission Procedures. Public hearings are conducted by the chair in accordance with the following procedures. The chair of the commission directs all activity during the hearings. All comments shall be addressed to the commission. Any item on this agenda may be continued to a subsequent hearing. Applicants will be allotted up to 10 minutes to present and justify proposals. Following staff presentation of the item, other speakers will be given up to 2 minutes. The applicant is allotted up to 5 minutes for a rebuttal of comments. No additional comments will be accepted upon the close of public hearing, although the commission reserves the right to direct questions to any speaker on any matter. Special procedures, time limits may be applied to any item as prescribed by the chair. Appeal of commission actions must be filed in writing within 7 calendar days.
Thank you, Secretary Harrow. And then as a reminder, copies of the current agenda and staff reports for each of the items on the agenda are available from the Planning Division office on Friday afternoon preceding the meeting, and they are also available online. So let's talk about continuances and exceptions. This part of the meeting allows for applicants, members of the public, or other interested parties to request an item to be 1, continued without hearing, 2, withdrawn, or 3, taken out of order. So are there any request applicants, the public or the commission, for a continuance or exception for any of the items on tonight's agenda?
Chair, we have no requests.
Okay, thank you, Elizabeth. And then again, because Commissioner Ikezi isn't here right now, let me just remind you all that the Planning Commission does have 7 members. So whenever the full commission is not present, applicants have the option to continue their item to another meeting. I don't think that'll be an issue tonight, but I want to make sure folks know that. So we'll move on to the consent calendar. Secretary Harrow, you want to read about the consent calendar?
Sure. The procedure for the consent calendar is as follows. Consent calendar items may be enacted, approved, or adopted by one motion unless requested to be removed by anyone for discussion or explanation. If any member of the Planning Commission, the staff, the applicant, or a member of the public wishes to comment on a consent calendar item or would like the item to be heard on the regular agenda, make this request now.
Are there any requests?
Items listed on the consent calendar with associated file numbers constitute public hearing items.
You want to go ahead and read which ones are on the consent calendar? We actually have 2 items on the consent calendar.
Oh, item 1A, the Planning Commission meeting minutes of October 13th, 2021. And item 1B, action to amend existing use permit for ABC license type 4.1 for NVIDIA corporate campus at 2788 to 2888 San Tomas Expressway.
This would be the time for a motion to approve the consent calendar. Do I hear one?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion by Commissioner Harrow and a second by, was it Commissioner Huang?
Commissioner
Yes.
Wang, yeah.
Okay. Any discussion? We'll move to the vote, Elizabeth.
Chair Biagini,
Yes.
Commissioner Cherukuru,
Yes.
Commissioner Hero,
Yes.
Commissioner Wang,
Yes.
Commissioner Salam,
Yes.
Commissioner Bhatnagar.
Yes.
Thank you, and the motion passes.
Thank you, Elizabeth. We'll move right into public presentations. Elizabeth, are there any members of the public that would like to briefly address the commission on any item that is not on the agenda?
No, we do not have any hands raised for any comments.
Okay, well then we'll go ahead and move on to public hearing items. And we have one, a study session on zoning code update orientation. So staff, I'm not sure. Is it
John Davidson with, yeah.
Okay,
John
that's what I
Davidson.
thought. Proceed with your presentation, John.
Thank you, Madam Chair. John Davidson with the Planning Division. And I'm going to give an orientation to our zoning code update, which we should have out for public release in the next month or so. Let me start my presentation here. And so it's been, our original zoning code was adopted in 1969. So it's been over 50 years since our zoning code has been comprehensively updated. And what we're doing with this zoning code update is, first and foremost, creating a zoning code that's consistent with our general plan. Our general plan was updated in 2010, and we haven't updated the zoning code to follow along with it. So that's one of the key things is zoning code consistency and creating new zoning districts that help us implement the general plan. We're also thinking about simplified processes so that it's easier to process permits for things that create placemaking, that are ideas that help people remodel their houses easily, things that will make the zoning code more accessible and easier to use. We're proposing a number of refinements to single family districts to make it a little bit easier for people with non-conforming lots in one way or another. We've heard a lot about what people want as far as ADU regulations. So we're proposing additional regulations for ADUs. And we're also dealing with what we're calling high occupancy uses, meaning overcrowding, especially around Santa Clara University, and short-term rentals, which are a recent hot button issue. Within the zoning code update, we're creating new high-density residential designations that help us implement, especially our specific plan areas. Mixed-use districts for the commercial corridors, where at the current time, for instance, our commercial corridors either just have a flat commercial designation without the possibility for residential. These new mixed-use districts will allow for both without a conditional use permit. New office and industrial districts, and this is one of the bigger, more unsung areas of the zoning code update, in that much of the city's land area north of the Caltrain tracks is zoned now either light or heavy industrial. And what the new general plan will do will introduce zoning designations that implement the low and high intensity office designations that were created in the previous general plan. Low intensity office is the pink areas, high intensity office are the purple areas, and they map to floor area ratios of 1.0 and 2.0 respectively. So to define what a floor area ratio is, it's how big a building you can develop as defined by how big the lot is. So if you have a lot that's 50,000 square feet in size and you have a maximum floor area ratio of 1, the maximum building size that you could build is 50,000 square feet. So these set, the floor area ratios set limits for intensity of use on a lot for non-residential uses. So again, the low intensity areas have a floor area ratio of 1. The higher intensity areas have a floor area ratio of 2. And these areas were designated in relation to major arterial corridors. So the higher intensity uses are centered around Santa Tomas Expressway and just along the expressways, basically. So we also have a new quasi-public district that'll help us implement our public uses. So with single-family refinements, I have a number of slides that the upgrades that we're making to the single-family part of the zoning ordinance really responds to typical problems that people have been having and that the planning division deals with on a fairly regular basis in relation to single-family additions. With covered porches, one of the things that we wanted to do was offer people the ability to build larger, deeper porches in front of their houses. So we're proposing, instead of the current 3-foot encroachment, to allow up to 6 feet, which will provide more relief and more of a neighborly feel in residential neighborhoods. One of the things that we're thinking about, especially useful for the old quad, is allowing existing non-conforming setbacks, meaning if you have a side yard setback that's less than 5 feet, which is the standard, that homeowners under the new zoning code can match the existing non-conforming side setback down to a minimum of 3 feet for 1-story additions to the rear of the house. So for the relatively straightforward additions, that's going to be something that doesn't require a variance or some sort of discretionary approval. So making those things, again, easier and streamlined. One of the things that we've heard a lot of in relation to our accessory dwelling units is that, especially in the old quad, people are interested in multiple story ADUs, but ADUs that also are consistent with the existing neighborhood pattern. So what we're proposing is that for detached ADUs, homeowners can build what's called a 1.5 story ADU. So an accessory dwelling unit that has 2 stories in height, but the second story is mostly contained under the roof. So for a half story, usually, again, most of this volume is under the roof, and the perimeter walls are usually only a couple of feet above the ceiling of the previous floor. So it adds living area without adding too much volume. So our proposal for that is 22-foot height limit for detached accessory dwelling units to keep them relatively low in scale compared to the primary dwelling unit, but they can be up to 1,000 square feet in area, so relatively spacious in terms of floor area. The other thing that we're doing with ADUs is getting rid of the requirement for consistency of materials, of exterior materials and roof forms in relation to the primary dwelling unit, which, for the most part, we haven't seen it as an issue, and it allows people it allows neighborhoods more variety in terms of the kinds of buildings that are proposed. So those are the residential upgrades. As for non-residential upgrades, one of the simplified processes that we're going through at this point is creation of a minor use permit process for a smaller, less controversial use permits that can be approved by the Director of Planning at the Development Review hearing. This is something that will make it a little bit easier for people to process their permits, and while still having a notice public hearing for a discretionary approval. We have a couple of changes that we're also proposing to encourage placemaking, including streamlining our live entertainment permit process, creating administrative standards so live entertainment can be approved without a conditional use permit, provided that the live entertainment use has separation requirements or meets separation requirements from adjacent residential uses and has hours of operation that are consistent with the code requirements. So this is something that we've heard a lot about and are really excited about in terms of finding ways to create more placemaking opportunities. The other thing that we're excited about in terms of placemaking is simpler outdoor seating requirements, and just making it by right that property owners can have up to 24 outdoor seats without a permit. So the current requirement is only 12, and just from our perspective, more seating, having the ability to create a little bit of a node of activity on a retail property by having additional outdoor seating really is something that helps to activate the street and helps to activate commercial areas. So that's something that we're really looking forward to. And honestly, I think that this is one sort of learning moment from the pandemic. If you look at other neighboring cities and their downtowns, the zoning code requirements apply to private property. I'm talking about public property here, but if you look at places like downtown Los Altos, who's moved dozens of tables out into their main street and created outdoor seating areas up and down their main street, it's a terrific place to be now, and looking forward to some of that happening in Santa Clara. We're also reworking our special permit process so that that's something that does not require council approval for the temporary outdoor permits for things like church carnivals and the like. We're trying to make that something that's also administrative in character. So those are the streamlining provisions. The next section that I'm going to talk about is the ongoing concern about overcrowding, especially in relation to Santa Clara University. So the consideration here in terms of creating some sort of cap on the number of people in a dwelling unit is the Fair Housing Act. So the first thing that we really have to talk about for context is federal fair housing laws and how we go about being consistent with those, but also trying to address this idea of overcrowding. So one of the things that we've been struggling with is, how to define, or how can you adequately address overcrowding without discriminating against large families, for instance. You can't just say with a zoning code, residences are limited to 5 occupants. The city can't be discriminatory against, large families or against anything that's, you can't even define the term family. So what we've done in this version of the zoning code is we've moved away from the old zoning code definitions of boarding houses and housekeeping units. And the housekeeping units is centered around the idea of people that occupy a dwelling unit and that has a single kitchen. The new definition is talking about a single housekeeping unit and focuses on the idea that it's a group of people that are occupying a dwelling unit and have a common living arrangement, including sharing expenses, sharing rent, food and utility costs, shared chores, things like that. A housekeeping unit can be unrelated people. It can be either renters or owners. So what we've come up with as far as trying to create some sort of a limit in terms of the number of people or creating an occupancy cap. So what we've done is we're creating a cap on the number of individuals who reside in the single house in the single family dwelling, in addition to the single housekeeping unit, or in the dwelling generally, in addition to the single housekeeping unit. So in a single family dwelling, for instance, and you can see our helpful graphic down in the bottom right, you could have potentially 3 individuals in addition to the single housekeeping unit. So for duplexes, it would be 2, and for a multifamily or a multiple dwelling unit, also 2. The number of individuals within that single housekeeping unit, though, would not be regulated or limited. So in addition to that, one of the things that we think is a novel way of dealing with overcrowding is to come up with a metric for how much of the house is still available to everybody, what we're calling common habitable area. So things that like the dining room or the living room or the kitchen. And in this in this metric, garages and hallways aren't considered part of the common use areas. So what we're doing is that we're proposing a minimum common habitable area for new construction of at least 25%. So that's, that would be, again, kitchen, living room, dining room, would likely prevent landlords from converting things like the dining room into an additional sleeping area. So that's one way that we're dealing with the overcrowding issue. One other area of concern over the last few years has been the idea of short-term rentals and what they can do to the impacts that they have on residential neighborhoods. We're proposing to have a short-term rental registration process within the city of Santa Clara. So where people who own properties and they want to use them for short-term rentals less than 30 days would have to register with the city annually and pay transient occupancy tax on any rentals that they do that are less than 30 days. We also, within the zoning code, differentiate or have differentiate between what we're calling unhosted rentals, where the property owner is not there or an adult authority is not there, versus hosted rentals where the property owner, the homeowner, is there. So unhosted rentals are limited on individual properties of up to 90 days in a calendar year. So only a quarter of the year can be used, houses can be used for unhosted rentals. So there are occupancy limits for short-term rentals where individual rooms or studio units are limited to 2 people. One-bedroom units are limited to 3, and all other dwelling units, 2 people per bedroom, but not more than 8 total. And so today we've had a number of stakeholder meetings with developers and neighborhood groups, a number of public meetings where we've talked about a variety of topics in the zoning code, including parking, development standards, what how people feel about our industrial ordinances. We've done numerous meetings with the old quad, especially in relation to the idea of overcrowding and student housing. And we had an online survey that included where we received more than 500 responses. So we've done a fair amount of outreach now, and the next step that we're going to take is get a public draft of the zoning code online in the next month or so. It'll be up for likely 45 days. Sometime, either at the end of the year or early next year, I'll be back for an additional study session where we can deal with the code as a whole and really dive into particular areas of interest from the Planning Commission. So our next steps, like I said, now through the winter, we're doing Planning Commission and Council study sessions, and we'll have at least one more with the Planning Commission and a couple with the Council. Our public review draft is out next month. Adoption hearings are in the spring and later in the spring for the Council. And with that, happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Okay, I have a couple of questions.
Sure.
One thing that, the easier question. So ADUs, as this applies primarily to, I think, the old quad or that type of area, they can match non-conforming, but that's not the same to say that if there is no non-conforming and I happen to be in the old quad, I can put an ADU that is non-conforming. That's a convoluted way of asking the question, isn't it? Yeah, in other words, you have to already be non-conforming if you want to add something that's also non-conforming.
If you're attaching to the main house, yes.
Okay.
If it's a detached ADU, state law requires cities to have 4-foot side and rear yard setbacks for detached ADUs. So those will be a part of the code. Okay,
and then the second question, I'm going to ask it as one question because I think it's probably one answer. But when you're talking about the single housing unit plus 3, the occupancy limits for short-term rentals, even as much as the 25% requirement for common areas. What is the enforcement process for something like that?
At least with common living area, that's something that we felt was very enforceable in the sense that we're looking at plans before units are developed.
Okay,
So,
makes sense.
so that's good. The other things are going to be, basically typical code enforcement process where it's complaint driven.
Okay, in other words, yeah. Somebody's going to have to call in and say, hey, in order for an code enforcement to get involved. That's going to
Correct.
be a little difficult. Okay.
But the good thing is that with short-term rentals, there is the individual or property owners have to register, and their registration can be revoked. So
all right.
There's more teeth to the short-term rental process.
Okay, thank you. We have Commissioner Cherakuru followed by Commissioner Huang with questions. Priya?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Davidson. So a couple of nuances is we had extensive discussions when these rentals were coming, and also when we had our workshop on the design standards, and then we had a study session not too long back on objective design standards. So I'm trying to understand the interface of all the feedback, and where we are clarifying the zoning ordinance requirements versus the objective design standard requirements, and or the ADU ministerial permit requirements. So, John, I don't know.
Let me take a crack at it. The ADU standards will be a part of the zoning code. I think that the main thing to differentiate here is that ADU standards, again, are ministerial, meaning that there's no discretion involved. It's not something like a conditional use permit, which would go before the planning commission. The planning commission would have to weigh whether the accessory dwelling unit is compatible with the neighborhood and how to make it more compatible. Ministerial means that the standards, as long as you meet the standards, you can get a permit. So still a part of the zoning code, just the process is streamlined and it removes that idea of discretion where conditions can be attached.
And John, I just wanted to clarify, I think everyone's aware of this, but that's actually a requirement from the state that we create a ministerial process. We have to eliminate the discretionary review.
Yes, and thank you. I think that, so I wanted to understand, and I think John helped answer that, is that they would still need to adhere to the zoning ordinance guidelines or actual requirements. They just won't go through a public hearing process. Okay.
And with objective design standards, many of them will be in the zoning code and also a part of the standards that we administer. But some objective design standards could be potentially, we could have additional documents that will contain those kinds of standards, as long as they're objective, as long as they're non-discretionary, that we can also apply in certain cases. So for instance, we will have objective design standards in some of our specific plans, including Patrick Henry Drive. And if a particular housing development is subject to a non-discretionary approval, we can still apply those objective design standards. So I think that's where those sort of interfaces lie. When the process is non-discretionary, those are the standards that we have to rely on.
Got it. Thank you, John. And then my second question is, are we adding more special districts? You mentioned you were adding additional zoning classifications. Does that mean, are we also adding additional special districts into our zoning code now?
Yeah, we will. We will be, well, we'll be adding districts that conform to the general plans. So where we didn't used to have office districts or the office districts that would implement what the general plan displays, you know, with low intensity and high intensity office, we're creating zoning districts for that. And we're also creating a number of zoning districts that are specific to our specific plans, where, you know, Patrick Henry Drive has a number of zoning designations that we have to create zoning standards for, and those will be included in the zoning code itself. And in addition to that, yeah, so those are the main ways that new districts are going to be added. It's either stuff that wasn't previously shown and represented, or that was on the general plan map but wasn't displayed on the zoning map. Mixed use districts along commercial corridors is another big one. And then the specific plan areas. So those three things, mixed use districts, office industrial, and our specific plan areas.
And will Old Quad have another one?
No, what's interesting about the Old Quad is that the Old Quad, if you look at the zoning map today, it's a complete hodgepodge. And what will happen is that we will be rezoning the Old Quad to be consistent with the general plan. So it'll, maybe if I can, might be something that we can show at least from on the first slide. It doesn't really show up well, but basically the Old Quad will become much more consistent in terms of having mostly single family designations, except along the sort of Franklin Street area and along the edges near El Camino. So,
and I just wanted to add that that's actually a state requirement as well, that our zoning match up to our general plan. And John, correct me if I'm wrong, but that's really why we have to, you know, make these areas consistent.
No, thanks, Rena, and that's exactly right. And for a long time, we were taking advantage of the fact that the city of Santa Clara is a charter city and didn't necessarily have to have zoning code and general plan consistency, but recent changes to state law have made that a requirement. So yeah, thanks, Rena.
I was curious though why we did not consider to be a historic district.
I think that the fact that, well, and I'll let Rena weigh in here also, but I think the fact that the Old Quad has historic properties is a little bit different than what the zoning designations are. And there still are still historic processes involved if properties are listed on our historic resources inventory. But that's, again, a little bit different than the zoning code.
Yeah, and I think that the process for designating the Old Quad or other areas of the city as historic are definitely, it's an open process. It's something that can be explored. And if the council directs us to do that, you know, staff can do the outreach and do that for that intended purpose. As the commissioners are aware, we have a joint study session with the council coming up related to SB 9 and SB 10. And it really raises this question about whether or not the city wants to do proactive work around designating, you know, areas. The Old Quad obviously comes to mind, right, as a historic district, a historic area, because there are some nuances related to SB 9 and 10 that differentiate areas that are considered historic from that standpoint. So that's actually something that we're going to be asking our council in relationship to the implementation of SB 9 and SB 10, whether, of course, that would have to come with resources to do this work, right? But we have a contemporary issue in front of us about whether or not the city should do that proactive work to see if a historic district should be included in this area.
And I know this has been quite a while in the making, but I know at least from all my 4 years from 2014, that has been an actual interest of a majority. And I won't say that not everybody with the new changes of ownership might be different, The limiting factor, of course, was that they would have the need for owners to sign. And so there was caveats, but I would highly encourage, because of, if not a limiting, at least an overlay of protection that it would offer. And as part of the zoning, because I don't want us unraveling a sweater again once we have gone down the path of a whole zoning code update and not having considered a historic district and its intended guidelines that would be unique for this particular, actually a great location, Old Quad, and a historic icon for the city of Santa Clara. So I'd highly encourage that it be parallel process, not a linear process.
So the zoning itself isn't what would be historic. It would be designating the area historic as a historic neighborhood, and that is something that would require a substantial amount of outreach, and we should have a process on that. And my only kind of comment on that is we have gotten to a point with the zoning code, which we've probably been working on for probably a decade, but really, really intently in the last 3 to 4 years, right? And so the world is always changing around us too with state law. And I do feel like if we want, the council to weigh in on whether or not we should begin this work. And if so, we would need a robust outreach process. So I'm definitely open to the feedback, but I also wanted to acknowledge that there is a big body of work with that. And with that would mean a schedule implication, and the fact that zoning and a historic designation aren't necessarily one and the same. So I wanted to just share that kind of for what it's worth. Yeah, for what it's worth.
I understand. And it sounds more like just okay, we looked to the city council. Where I'm going with feedback is, from other cities that have it, knowing fully well that it is imbibed as part of an overlay district into the zoning, as opposed to it being a standalone, not considered, where it goes into design guidelines. It's more helpful to include as part of the zoning itself. You can, of course, always come back with zoning code amendments, no doubt. It's going to be an iterative process and engagement process, but it still rests within the zoning code, is my recommendation. It cannot be independent or almost a siloed document, because as we are looking at from 50 years, 3 years in the making, I feel that it should have been addressed, because there was a lot of actual feedback when it was even started. 3 years, again, COVID delays being considered, that Old Quad had its interest in representation in the zoning code itself, which would have alleviated a lot of the actual battles that come to HLC. So
yeah, I did want to acknowledge Commissioner Shirakuru. We've had a lot of outreach in the Old Quad, a lot of architects who've been involved, a lot of community members who've been involved. We've engaged them as individuals. We've engaged them in meetings. We've taken all those things that you guys are getting variances for because they rub up against like the code and prevent the implementation of really good design in a historic neighborhood. These are things we've actually included in the zoning code. So I do want you to acknowledge, I do want you to be aware of the tremendous outreach to the Old Quad and the feedback and the inclusion. And we are going to make the document available. We're going to do a meeting actually that we're scheduling right now with the Old Quad. So I think in the next month, we're going back to the Residents Association and doing an outreach meeting and presenting this information so they can once again get into the document and provide feedback. So I just wanted to acknowledge there's been a lot of effort, and then seriously a lot of involvement, with this neighborhood that's really engaged on these topics.
And that's very helpful. And I'm sure that it's a good engaged discussion. Where I'm going with is the output, that it be codified. Now, the people engaged will not be there forever, but a historic district will be there forever. So I just want to make sure that as we are transcribing or getting the input, that it be more simple and not that it linger within other residential district guidelines. a historic district with its historic fabric, its aesthetics, its materials, its finishes are much more refined than what will happen in any other residence or on a unit by unit basis. So I just wanted to distinguish what a district would offer as protection, information, an actual quantification of data versus what would have been imbibed into a normal residential, a single family residential, a multifamily residential, a duplex. I just wanted to distinguish for the record that it is different. And I yield, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Terakuru. We have Commissioner Huang and then Commissioner Salim. Commissioner Huang?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, my question is, I look at the presentation, some limitation for the ADU, height, setback, etc. How the parking? Any requirement for the parking?
In general, the city of Santa Clara is relatively close to high quality transit, or transit that at least meets the state's requirements for 15-minute headways. So there are very few areas of the city where we could require an additional parking space. So we're proposing no additional parking for ADUs.
Okay,
And I guess,
thank you.
Commissioner Wang, just to put that into context again, the state actually says that we can't require parking unless you're in areas that aren't considered high quality transit. And by the state's definition, whether we agree with it or not, a majority of the city is considered within high quality transit. So that's the reason for that.
Thank you. Yeah, that's it.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Huang. Move to Commissioner Salim.
Okay, so I promise you I'm not trying to stump the teacher for John and but I have a couple of questions that are dependent on each other. Is there anything about ADUs that says you must have the primary dwelling unit first before you build an ADU?
You just stumped the teacher.
Gloria Shara,
No, I think
we do. I just want you to know, Commissioner Salim, we have a staff meeting every other week, and we always have questions about ADUs. So it's we go through this.
Our understanding is that yes, the main dwelling has to exist first.
No.
Okay, go ahead, Xander. I'm sorry.
Under the newer versions of the law, you have a right to build a house with an ADU at the same time. And then under SB 9, which we're gonna have first, which you'll be hearing about, you can build a duplex. So yeah, no, you don't actually have to have an existing house to build an ADU.
But if you,
I think Xander's anticipating my second question, which was built on that one. AB 9 lets you split your lot. Your primary home on lot 1 can have an ADU. Your secondary lot without another primary home, which have to be rented monthly or more, isn't built yet, quote unquote. But you want to build a second ADU over there and immediately start generating income from renting it. The same owner, both lots split, suddenly one house, 2 ADUs. Am I just imagining the crazy scenario, or is that actually something that the law would support?
Well, we will get more into the weeds on SB 9 on December 7th, but there is specific language addressing ADUs in SB 9. And unfortunately, it's badly written. It says if you do a lot split, you cannot then take advantage of the ADU law.
Oh,
but if you don't do a lot split, that language doesn't exist. So you could theoretically build 2 houses and then have an ADU, or so.
I think 2 ADUs.
That's what I'm getting at too.
Yeah.
Not without subdividing the lot, though. You couldn't. It would exceed. No, you can't do that.
Yeah.
Well,
or at least
That's our,
Yeah,
Let's
at
get
least
into the
one.
weeds on
Yeah.
December 7th.
yeah, I think we should talk about that on December 9th.
I will be patiently
agree.
waiting, and I will give you, I'll send you things in email about possible scenarios that confound me in the evening. That was one of them. I was,
Yes, please.
yeah. It still boggles me that the lot that I actually have a home on could be split, and then 2 homes, and then 2 ADUs. I mean, one each, you know. I could have 4 units on this one space because they all fit under the rules, you know.
We're all a little terrified by this, but
Yeah,
we
it's scary.
clarity
And,
next time we
somebody's
talk.
gonna do it. Actually, what I worry more about is not that somebody does it, but a lot of somebody do it all together. Okay, good. Well,
The one thing I will add though is that the challenge is going to be is the ability to subdivide.
yes.
So the limitations based on the placement of its existing houses, unless you want to demolish, it would be very challenging. So we may not have as much of a rush unless there's a trend towards demolishing existing conditions. So
Yeah, that's why I left to the
Yeah.
absurd case of dividing without building the second home, but going ahead with a second ADU. And if that fell under the law, you would suddenly have 3 homes on the lot without having to demolish.
we would have to have a filed map at the same time if we were to do something like that's the only way we could process it. And a condition for approving the building permit would be completed the subdivision, because it has to be on its own lot. At least that's the way I'm reading it.
Okay, you've dissuaded my fears a little bit, but we'll wait for the December conversation and see how crazy it gets.
Sounds
Thank
good.
you. That's all.
Uh, Thank you, Commissioner Salam. You know, with SB 910 and the zoning changes, I kept thinking, man, I'm missing something. There's a confounding question out there that hasn't occurred to me yet. Thank you. You just added to it, Commissioner Salam. It's, I think, terrifying is one way to put it. I do have one really quick question to staff. And this gets kind of bandied about every now and then in certain segments of the city, but let me just ask it. Does not the old quad extend onto the other side of El Camino as well? The north side of El Camino?
Yeah, that's referred to the old quad, and it was originally without El Camino, traversing it. But we would have to include, right. And when we looked at years ago, in about 2005, a conservation district, it did incorporate both sides of El Camino. But again, those boundaries would have to be determined through that process if we go down that road about creating either an overlay district or a historic district.
Right.
There's also Agnew's Village, which has still some
thank you.
historic homes as well. So all those things would have to be looked at, depending upon what approach is being considered.
Thank you very much, Gloria, because that worries me that some of the old knowledge doesn't always carry forward. And you're right, Agnew's as well. I wouldn't want to see that north side of, do I have my directions right? That north side, the other side of El Camino and Agnew somehow get missed in any treatment with respect to historic districts, whatever we want to call them in Santa Clara. I don't see any other hands up from commissioners with questions for staff. Do we have any questions from the public? Elizabeth?
No, we do not.
Then I guess this would be the time for a motion to close the public hearing.
Motion to close public hearing.
Second.
Okay, motion by Commissioner Cherukuru, second by, was that Commissioner Huang?
Yes.
Okay, we can go to the vote to close public hearing.
Yes, the motion is to close public hearing. Commissioner Biagini,
Yes,
Commissioner Cherukuru,
Yes.
Commissioner Hero,
Aye.
Commissioner Wang,
Yes.
Commissioner Salam,
Yes.
Commissioner Bhatnagar?
Yes.
Thank you. Motion
Hey.
passes.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Then we'll go to the reports of commission board, excuse me, reports of commission and board liaison and committee. Do we have any announcements or other items?
Clara, I have a quick question on the previous item. if you don't mind.
Okay.
Do we know when we'll receive the draft for review, staff? Is it already?
The draft
In our
is
package?
almost, no, it's almost done, and it should be out for public review by the end of November.
Okay, and a quick last note. There was a historic park, and I'm not recollecting the name. I tried to Google it. That's why it took me a while to get to it. But what was the, maybe Chair, you can recollect, the archaeology request, or they were asking for a natural landscape that has historic implications? Do you remember? It's not the Agnew's historic
I think
park.
it's Eulastack.
Yeah, I was going to say
Yes,
you.
thank you, thank you, thank you. Is there? Thank you, Gloria. Is there a special status of that park, or do we know what it is? I know it comes under Parks and Rec, but there's always been this interest from the actual conservatory there to consider it as a historic resource as well. This I'm just recollecting from my 8 years ago.
Right, and it did go through city council multiple times with I think the Parks and Rec Commission, and I think the Friends of Eulastack as well, promoting that. But I think there was something technically incorrect about the proposal, that because it was essentially created out of an existing area. And I thought that there weren't actually any archaeological, I guess, artifacts or anything like that found there. It's nearby, or that there's a preserve, but it's not quite the same. I think because it was created, it was manufactured, so to speak, almost. I don't remember the exact specifics, but it did go to council, and then it wasn't supported from like I said, whether it technically applies in versus a nature preserve versus some other type of park setting.
Thank you, Gloria. Thank you for that clarification. I know it went through a lot of waves.
It did many times.
Thank you. All right, I yield, Chair. Now moving to the next item. You're welcome.
Thank you, Commissioner Terikuru. Let's see, where were we? So I take it no other announcements, and we can move to Commissioner Travel and Training reports or requests to attend trainings. Nothing there. Are we going to make a record with a quick meeting tonight?
No, Commissioner Salem has a request. He's doing his.
There. I'm
little
sorry.
jig.
Now I see. Now I see his hand. Okay.
I didn't want to just interrupt. So I was going to let Elizabeth explain, not in email, but in live, that getting to those sessions that we attended apparently is actually a pain in the neck and a problem. I was really disappointed because even during one of the conversations they were holding, they said that this was available for viewing, and they didn't qualify it as that you had to have been a paid attendee before and after the conference to see the sessions, but sorry.
Don't be sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is something new. I did speak, as I said, with a representative from APA. So this is new because typically they do have the information up for the previous years.
Disappointing.
Well, if somebody wants to come over and sit down and have a cup of coffee, I can log in. They can watch the session.
And I will do the same.
Yeah.
Elizabeth, do you know if there's a reduced rate to watch it, like after the fact, if there were topics that people wanted to watch?
I spoke with APA and they did not give me that information yet. They said that we could get information how to register to do another registration. If someone has an interest, I can explore this further. But there was no talk about a reduced rate even, but I'm happy to.
I was more just interested for future reference. Sometimes there are good sessions that become interesting later on when you're working on something to look at. So just. That's all.
Commissioner Salim, Commissioner Huang, we may want to write in and say, hey, we attended and we have an upgrade for you.
Yeah, give them some feedback, right? I can do that.
That's exactly. Along with Elizabeth making a second attempt at it, because I do agree with Rena. This is important. And sometimes cold storage training, gee, I remember we had this conversation. If I could just go back to it and refresh my mind, it's really helpful.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. No other items on this section. We'll move to Director of Community Development reports, Planning Commission budget updates.
Yes, commissioners, I'm not sure if you received the memo, but your starting budget beginning July 1st was 16,320. And with current expenses, that was the study session last time, or the presentation by Whitetree for the parking lifts, and the parking study was 2,500. Your balance currently is $13,127.
And whose budget does this joint session coming up with the city council come out of?
It's we're not using consultants. So
okay,
it's
good enough.
It's our Xander here, our assistant city attorney, a lot of his time. And other city staff as well, but it's not a consultant.
No, not that I was trying to be picky, but thank you. Okay, thank you, Gloria. Upcoming agenda items?
I don't have any to report right now. Rena, do you have any?
Yeah, we do have some things coming your way in the long-range planning world. So Patrick Henry Drive specific plan is wrapping up. So we do intend to bring that specific plan to the Planning Commission for your actual consideration in January. So it is a meaty plan, and I would recommend, and I can send the website out to the planning commissioners just to refresh yourselves. We've had study sessions in the past, and I recognize there's a lot of material and information we're going to cover when we bring that plan forward to you in January. But it's been a few years underway, and so it would be just want to put that in your radar that plan's kind of coming to completion. Chair Biagini, I see Commissioner Shirakuru's hand raised. Maybe about that.
Yes, Commissioner Shirikuru, you're on.
Just a quick thought on where we are with the related project. It's been in at least the best journals, and a lot of getting a lot more of attention. I see the construction fencing is up, so it'll be nice to just get a quick pulse on how that project's doing.
Yeah, they've been making steady progress. There is site work. As you know, this is a project that involves a lot of infrastructure. It's pretty complex given the previous uses on the site. They are intending to submit for building permits, and that does take a lengthy review, but they are moving diligently and meeting with city staff on a regular basis related to all the complexities of the review. So that project is moving forward. A ground in the shovel for an actual building will take a little bit longer because that would have to happen after the building permit application has been reviewed and issued for building, permit, and that application has not yet been made for those phase 1 projects.
Got it. Thank you, Rena. It's just nice to know that it's progressing well, and looking forward to bringing it into our city soon. Okay. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Shirikuru.
Chair Biagini, one other thing, as John Davidson had mentioned, with the zoning cut update, we'll also be adding in another study session or two, getting into more of the details. We kind of gave a high level because we have some new planning commissioners here, but we do know that this is something kind of meaty, and we did take into consideration the Planning Commission's feedback that you don't want to be approving this document in one meeting. So we are splitting up that adoption hearing for you as well. And so we'll be kind of coming to you with the development standards, the uses, and then some other special information, right? So we're going to be very intentional about how you consider this new code, and it's not going to be just one night where you're going to consider this, document of a couple hundred pages.
Appreciated. Commissioner Salim.
Are we on to council actions yet? I was curious.
I think we are going. No
Oh,
other
wait.
Yes, that's
hands
the
up
next
on the
item.
rest.
Oh, wait.
That's coming up right now. Okay, council items, and then
Okay.
you'll be on.
All right, so I will just refer to things related to planning commission. If you have other questions, then you can ask those following. One of the items that the planning commission did not see is, and it's because of our change in process to the architectural review ordinance, and that's essentially is there's an EIR for 1200 to 1310 Memorex Drive, and this is for a future data center. And the reason it's going to council, normally it would just go to development review hearing, is because it has a statement of overriding consideration with the EIR. So there are some, and primarily revolves around the historic nature of the property because of the technology that was developed there. And so there's no way to preserve the building on site in order to build that structure and operate it the way it needs to be designed internally. So it's calling for demolition, but there is a host of mitigation measures to commemorate the technology that was basically initiated there. Secondly, there was the other thing about the housing, I think this was mentioned in terms of SB9 and some of the new state law housing. During the public presentations, there were a bunch of speakers that wanted to address the home key proposals, and those are the conversion of hotels to either temporary or permanent housing. Primarily, it's a transitional housing program. And so we do have a number of those proposals, and one is for the Bella Vista Hotel on El Camino. And then there's a proposal that, but it's being considered now due to the financials that were developed for the project at, it's at White Oak Lane, I think it's 2035 White Oak. So they're going back and looking at the pro forma before that can move forward. But because of these state laws and the funding sources, they are no longer subject to a discretionary process. Even the Bella Vista one is an SB 35 project that we're processing with the project manager. I'm working with Steve Lee. And essentially it doesn't require any hearing at all. We just have to check, kind of objective standards. It doesn't require completeness. They can address conditions for the project. Project can be conditioned, basically fulfill those during the building permit. So there's no discretionary hearing. And again, we just check boxes that they conform to the various objective development standards that we have in other codes. And it's entitled by right with essentially no limit on the density. So that process and kind of the state of state law and basically and the land use entitlements that we normally grant, all that will be discussed on the November 9th study session with City Council. So, and there is an agenda report I would encourage you to look at because it does summarize the different funding sources and how those apply to what type of housing product and services. And then there's also, it's teamed up, and Commissioner Bhatnagar asked me about a white paper on him doing a white paper on the homelessness. And they're looking at potentially basically an unhoused or homeless task force to look at services as well as, housing product. And so they're going to discuss basically the funding, the types of products, and basically how what's permitted through state law and local entities. Actually, the county is spearheading a lot of these developments, and that's who processes it, and kind of the limitations that we have on some of these housing regulations. So anyway, it'd be good for everyone to participate in that, so you can hear about that. And again, the agenda report will be out soon, so you can take a look at that. And that's all I have to report.
I did want to announce that Commissioner Casey has joined the meeting.
Okay.
Sorry for being late.
Thank you. I noticed that. Hi, Yuki. Happy you could join us. Okay. So I think now That's it for city council actions. I don't see any hands up from my fellow commissioners, so this would be the point in time for a motion to adjourn. Do I hear one?
Well, Gloria had completely answered my question that I had my hand up for, so I didn't need to.
I was just
That's
going to
my
say there was
case.
some hand up.
Yeah, it disappeared.
Yep.
Okay.
Motion
right.
to adjourn.
Second.
Motion to adjourn by Priya, second by Commissioner Salem. Okay, are there any objections to adjourning? No objections, no abstentions, then we are adjourned to the November 17th meeting.
I was
Thank
hoping
you
to hear
all.
Commissioner Ikezi say anything.
All right. Thank you,
Not the
everybody.
same.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Have a good
Thank
evening.
you.